Now, there's nothing quite like playing a video game that's not just good or even great, but basically flat out perfect. Knowing that you're playing the work of masters at the top of their game is exhilarating because sustaining such a high level of quality across potentially dozens of hours of gameplay, well, that is an insanely hard task. But then that level arrives. Now, perfection is a tall order to strive for, and so it's little surprise that so many games get so incredibly close to the mark, only for one section of gameplay to let the whole thing down. Now, in the case of these 10 games, all of which received rave reviews from critics and are ranked amongst some of the greatest entries into their respective franchises, well, they offered up just a single level that just put a slight dampener on the entire experience. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 levels that stopped video games from being perfect. Number 10, Ironwood, God of War Ragnarok. God of War Ragnarok is an absolutely mesmerizing masterpiece of a AAA blockbuster, but there is one section in the game that just split fans right down the middle, and that is Ironwood. Roughly 1/3 of the way through the story, players are once again given control of Atreus, for what they surely assume will be another brief detour from the main campaign. But his journey through Ironwood drags on for about 2 hours of stamina-sapping fetch quests, repetitive combat, and dull walking around. I know that Ironwood definitely is beautiful and arguably the best looking area in the entire game, but the content therein feels like the most blatant sort of AAA padding, especially with the MMO tier quality for the unimaginative objectives. Now, Ironwood is useful for Atreus' character development, but did they really need to make it so bloody long? In a game otherwise defined by excellent pacing, this sluggish section is a tedious slog that feels like optional content that was accidentally made mandatory, and proves especially egregious on repeat playthroughs. Number 9, Titanic Monarch Zone, Sonic Mania. Now, Sonic Mania was a stunning reminder of just how great the franchise can be when due care was put into developing it. It's a fine example of a shamelessly nostalgic game that nevertheless largely earns its nostalgia, seemingly outlining a promising future direction for the series, but one that sadly hasn't ever been followed up on. As incredible as Sonic Mania is though, there is one zone that just pisses off just about anybody and unfortunately tarnishes what's otherwise the best Sonic game in literally decades. Of course, we're talking about the Titanic Monarch Zone, the final zone of the main game, and one of the zones created specifically for Sonic Mania rather than being a remix of a classic one. For starters, Titanic Monarch Zone is considerably longer than any other zone in the game, ensuring that many players will find themselves succumbing to the 10-minute time limit per act. Beyond that, the enemy and obstacle placement feel insanely cheap, not to mention the presence of the Ruby Mist, which will randomly teleport you around the map during Act 2. Given the likelihood that you'll end up with at least one game over during the final boss fight and have to start the entire zone from the beginning all over again, it can end up feeling more like a time sink than an actual good time. If you rage quit Sonic Mania during this level, well, nobody can actually blame you. Number 8, Obliteration Imminent, Dead Space. With the recent release of the fantastic Dead Space remake, what better time to reconsider the classic original and its single festering blemish of a mission? The game's 4th chapter, Obliteration Imminent, climaxes with the player taking control of a cannon to shoot incoming asteroids down to prevent the USG Ishimura's destruction. And as much as that might sound like a fun break from the necromorph stomping gameplay, it is not at all. Though a successful run through this section only takes 2 minutes in theory, it's incredibly difficult to hit all the incoming asteroids without overheating the cannons, ensuring that you're damn near guaranteed to fail this thing a bunch of times. It's especially challenging to survive on consoles because it doesn't have the precision of a mouse, enough so that some players ultimately resorted to cranking their display's brightness up to get a better look at the projectiles. Given this mission's infamy, many wondered how EA would treat it in the remake, and what a pleasant surprise it was to see it completely reworked with a similarly themed but quite different variation that wasn't nearly as punishing. Thank God. Number 7, the PAL card Backtracking, Metal Gear Solid. Hideo Kojima's original Metal Gear Solid is one of the most innovative and ambitious video games, and say it with me kids, of all time! An endlessly creative, gorgeously cinematic stealth actioner that is still a blast to play in its original form some 25 years later. But for all of its many wondrous moments and incredible boss battles, there is one section which continues to haunt players all of these years on, and that is the permissive action link or PAL card nonsense near the end of the game. The PAL card changes its shape depending on the temperature that it's subjected to, and in order to try and use it to stop Liquid Snake from launching Metal Gear Rex, you'll need to take it to a cold environment, return it to the computer, take it to a hot environment, and then take it back to the computer once more. This forces the player to listlessly backtrack to both the frosty warehouse where they previously fought Vulcan Raven, and then the blast furnace, and if players don't return to the computer quickly enough each time, the alloy will lose its shape, forcing them to try again. It is pure, aggravating, busy work, and while only a small portion of the game overall, it is by far the laziest and least interesting part of Metal Gear Solid. Mercifully, Kojima took the vocal fan outcry on board for his 2004 remake Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes, which made it far more convenient for players to change the card's shape with nearby objects. Number 6. Demolition Man, Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Let's face it, every Grand Theft Auto game has that level that just pisses everybody off with its absurdly punishing level of difficulty. In the case of GTA Vice City, it is surely Demolition Man, where you're tasked with piloting a remote control helicopter in order to plant 4 bombs around a construction site within a 7-minute time limit. Now that might sound generous enough, but between the maddening controls and resistance that you'll face from goons in the area, this is a mission which many players spend hours just trying to get through. Now granted, you can do yourself a huge favor by taking out as many goons as possible first, especially as the timer doesn't start until you pick up the first bomb, but it's still an absolutely hellish mission due to the infuriating clunkiness of piloting this damn thing. As woefully disappointing as it was, at least the recent Definitive Edition remaster of Vice City both added 30 seconds onto the mission timer and allowed players to instantly restart the mission upon failing, rather than having to go back to the mission marker from scratch. Number 5. The Meat Circus, Psychonauts. Now, Psychonauts is a game of such mesmerizing creativity. It is a solid gold cult classic which desperately deserves to be championed by many more people, but that is except for its final mental world, which is, of course, the infamous Meat Circus. Now, in theory, there are some really neat and twisted ideas at play here, given that the level's poultry-tastic circus aesthetics are the result of protagonist Rasputin and Coach Oleander's respective childhood memories of the circus and a butcher shop colliding in totally insane fashion. But this painful slog of a level is a life-force-draining chore comprised of an escort mission, finicky platforming that is also timed, regenerating enemies, and a pain in the ass of a boss fight to boot. It doesn't help that the controls and camera feel totally non-conductive to this being a fun level in any way as well. The latest Steam release of Psychonauts did thankfully see developer Double Fine listen to vocal complaints enough to give the level a notable nerf. But for those of us who took it on in its original form, it ensured an otherwise amazing game, well, sputtered to an exasperating finish. Number 4. The escape sequences, Ori and the Blind Forest. Ori and the Blind Forest and its sequel, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, are some of the most beautiful and mechanically precise adventure games from the last decade. It's clear that so much effort has been put into every aspect of their creation, so it's rather a shame that those pesky escape sequences are such damn downers. Both games feature a number of delineated sequences in which the player must maneuver Ori away from the incoming danger, such as a rising tide of water or massive enemy giving chase. Which sounds great, right? Well, except these sequences have no checkpoints to speak of, and lasting as long as 2 minutes apiece, force the player into a rote exercise of trial and error memorization. Some of the more punishing escape sequences are absolutely maddening and can take even above average skilled players dozens of attempts to get through. If these segments at least had a checkpoint placed into the middle, well, they wouldn't be so annoying, but as it stands, they deliver ridiculous difficulty spikes and, worse still, massive time sinks in an otherwise sublime work of art. Number 3. Isla Del Sol, Bayonetta. Bayonetta is one of the most beloved character action games ever, widely lauded for its flamboyant style and of course its inimitable protagonist, but things take a turn for the absolute BS in one of the game's final chapters, Isla Del Sol, which initially ditches the typical combat gameplay in favor of a rail shooter inspired by the classic 1985 arcade game Space Harrier. The prospect of riding a missile while taking down bad guys sounds fun in theory, but lasting for an entire 10 minutes, as it does without a single damn checkpoint to speak of, means that failure is going back to the very beginning and repeating the whole thing again. Naturally, this can be supremely irritating if you die more than a couple of times, which, given the degree of challenge on even lower difficulties, you are definitely likely to, which adds up to a terribly balanced level that just asks way too much of most players. The boss fight against Jean in the second half of the level is an absolute blast, but getting there, well, that is a major chore. Number 2. The Library, Halo Combat Evolved. While much has been written over the years about how much Halo Combat Evolved's library absolutely sucks, it's worth repeating again because it's such a tedious, drawn-out exception in an otherwise thrilling franchise starter. After so many dynamic missions and incredibly engaging firefights, Halo hits a brick wall in its 7th level, where you're forced to battle your way up a basically identical series of library floors while taking on a seemingly never-ending horde of the Flood. For starters, the copy-paste environment suggests this mission was rushed out of the door late in the day, and the sheer exhausting, repetitive nature of enemies that you're forced to take on makes it feel like a generic arcade shooter inexplicably shoved into something way more substantial. It's a colossal bore traversing each tier of the level in pursuit of the path to the next section, especially as this mission can take upwards of half an hour to get through. By the end of it, the Flood aren't even scary anymore, they're just annoying. Mercifully, the Master Chief Collection version of the game allows you to skip any mission entirely should you so wish, and this is surely one that you'll never want to revisit again. And number 1, Monster. Wolfenstein II: The New Colossus. Wolfenstein II: The New Colossus is one hell of a beefy, brutal FPS, a gorgeous, savage title that's certainly no picnic even on lower difficulties, but an adrenaline-infused blast all the same. But Machine Games tipped the balance a little too far in the game's 5th chapter, Monster, which climaxes with a 5-minute shooting gallery set in a courthouse. Now look, shooting Nazis in the face won't probably ever get boring, but this level really does put that notion to the test, given that you're tasked with surviving an exhausting horde of endlessly respawning, heavily armored Nazis while lacking much in the way of resources yourself. It is a textbook example of a piss-taking difficulty spike that simply wasn't paid sufficient enough attention during the game's QA process, and the fact that it's subsequently revealed to be a dream sequence only makes its punishing level of challenge that much more obnoxious. On the plus side though, if you can make it through this chapter, well, you're basically golden for the rest of the game, but still, no thanks. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 levels that stopped video games from being perfect. I hope you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Instagram at RetroJ, but the O is a 0, and you can come check out all of the Warhammer miniatures that I've been painting. I know I am a nerd. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. As we've already discussed here, perfection is a very hard prospect to try and achieve in any form, really. So don't beat yourself up if you make mistakes from time to time, my friend. We all do. We're human. It's what we're good at, apparently. But all you need to do is try and forgive yourself for mistakes that you've made in the past and go forward with a healthy and happy mentality. Because you are a massive ledge. You deserve love. You deserve the best things in life, all right? And do not let anything or anyone else tell you otherwise. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.